Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug speaks with distinguished legal professionals who have mastered the intricacies of building a successful law practice and then transitioning to retirement or other fulfilling pursuits when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
I'm Doug Wood. Welcome to this episode of From Dawn to Dusk. Today's guest is Gerry DiFiore, a corporate lawyer who spent more than 3 decades advising companies on high-stakes transactions from public offerings to global M&A deals worth billions of dollars. A former partner at Reed Smith and chair of its Securities Review Committee, Gerry built a reputation as not just a lawyer, but as a trusted business advisor whose clients have said thinks like a CEO. But beyond that deal table, Gerry has crafted a very different second chapter: an avid fisherman, caretaker of a family farm in Maine, and much, much more. Today, we'll explore that journey from building a world-class practice to redefining life beyond it. Gerry, welcome to the show.
Doug, thank you for having me.
So let's get right into it. You spent decades working on very complex M&A deals throughout the world at the very highest of levels. What was it about that energized you early on?
Well, my undergraduate degree was in economics, and I took a lot of courses in finance and business. And then when I was in law school, I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to mix my undergraduate degree with a career in the law. And I was thinking about getting a JD MBA and this and that. And while I was in law school, I was lucky enough to get an internship at the SEC's Boston regional office. And that was my second summer. My first summer, I had a horrible experience actually at a law firm in my hometown that kind of was making me even question the direction I was going. But I was lucky enough to get that SEC internship. And in that internship, I got to learn about securities law in greater detail. And I was lucky enough to meet a professor, an adjunct professor at my law school, who was the person who was running that office. And as a result of that, he mentored me, and he helped kind of open my eyes to what a career in the law could be like, and to be in the capital markets and M&A area. And so I think if I hadn't have had that experience, I might have still ended up being a business lawyer, but maybe not exactly the way I ended up doing it. I also think that the nature of my personality type is maybe more collaborative and strategic rather than combative. So I couldn't kind of see myself being a litigator. So it evolved. It wasn't like I walked into law school saying, oh, I'm going to be an M&A and capital markets lawyer. I wasn't really sure of that.
You make an interesting observation about running into a mentor that changed the course of your career. There's so many of the guests on the show started off like you did or in other directions we weren't quite sure where they were going to go. And then they bumped into a mentor who actually gave them their inspiration in a direction. So that's quite a common thing we see early on in lawyers' careers. And that's why I know you were a great mentor to many as yourself. So you paid it back that way. One of the things I found fascinating in terms of when I was researching, you and the career you had was the expressions that a number of clients used that said, you think like a CEO. I thought that was kind of fascinating because they're not saying that you think like a lawyer. So how does that think like a CEO and being a lawyer coalesce?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I would say as I got further along in practice and I got to know clients better, a lot of clients would be critical of me saying, this is a risk, that's a risk. You got to be careful of this. You got to be careful of that. And they're like, if all you do is point out risks, but you're not really doing anything more than that, you're really not doing a service to me. And so I quickly realized that not all risks are the same. And our goal as lawyers, at least I viewed my goal as a lawyer, as not pointing out every risk, no matter how infinitesimally small. And so what I realized is that clients wanted what I call maybe a probability magnitude analysis. Tell me about the biggest risks. Okay, how probable is the biggest risks? What are the risks that are likely to come up? How big are they? How do we find a practical solution, knowing we can't eliminate all risk? Because if you eliminate all risk, you don't get a deal. And so over time, I just got more comfortable with the notion of saying, you know what? I'm going to give you my best judgment. And I would basically say, this isn't really like legal advice. This is just the advice of a trusted advisor. And I very much enjoyed being able to act in that role. And I think clients really appreciated it. And they would often say to me, like, if they had another issue or I was bringing somebody else onto a call or an expert or whatever, they're like, please, before you get this person on, like explain to them what I'm really after, which is practical advice. I don't want every little tiny thing. I want the important stuff. So I think that's how that came to be. I wasn't like that in the beginning. I was much more trying to be ridiculously thorough. And that was partly because I was not so experienced.
Experience brings efficiency, that's for sure. So I know you've done deals all over the world, particularly in Asia. You actually lived in Asia for a stint at Reed Smith. Did you find the approach that you had to take with your U.S. clients versus your Asian or foreign clients any different?
Yeah, it's actually a great question. I think that's true. That would be true of U.S. versus Asia and U.S. versus Europe, because I also dealt with a lot of European clients, mostly Italian and French. So I would say yes. I would probably also say, and I know generalities aren't really great, but I would say that clients in Asia were probably the most willing to take on risk, the most comfortable with risk. And this, again, these are generalizations, but they approached it differently. I do think that everyone appreciated being told what possible risks might be. And then also, in many cases, saying, listen, you can tell me what the risks are. I don't need you to talk me sort of out of the deal. I'm wearing big boy pants, and I can accept the risk or not accept it. I just want to know kind of going in what I'm looking at. And sometimes you could mitigate the risk. You could structure around the risk. You could find an insurance product. If you use an example, like maybe you're selling a company and there's an environmental issue in the factory because they used to make semiconductors there. So it's a risk. And so, you plan for that. Like, that's something where you can say, all right, we know there's a risk here. Let's talk to some insurance companies and get some environmental insurance. So risks are not like things to be avoided. They're just things to be managed.
So contrast that now with Europe.
I think I probably have a little less experience in Europe, but I would say the Europeans, especially as it relates to the Americans, they think, the Americans worry about too many things. There are such differences in cultural approaches, especially things like employment practices. Europeans don't really care so much about that as Americans do. So when it comes to that, they have maybe diminished sensitivity, but as it relates to things like privacy, they have heightened sensitivity. It's quite different. They're not, it's not like it's an across the board higher versus lower. It's somewhat topically oriented, and there are differences based upon the subject.
I remember one occasion I was doing a deal in Europe, in France, and we were trying to push this deal through, and the client looks and says, someday you're going to have to learn not to be a cowboy and just to relax. We'll get the deal done. That was very early in my career. And I never forget that, to say, okay, I guess, we Americans want to rush too much. And Europeans, I found, very much never wanted to rush. They were very calm. They would take their time. And the experience I had a number of times when I did some deals in Asia was that they were impossible to really read on the other side. They would be nodding their heads yes all the time. Then you'd leave.
But yes didn't mean yes sometimes.
Great deal, and then you come back the next day, and it's like, was anybody listening?
Yeah, that was absolutely true of the Asian experience. They were also too polite. The culture is that it's impolite to say no. So yeah, you have to learn. There's some learning that goes with that, but it was all fun.
So you were on the top of the game. You're a very successful lawyer and had a great practice. But every successful lawyer, as you know, eventually faces the question, what's next? What am I going to do next? When did that sort of start with you? When you started to ask yourself, what's next on the horizon, as opposed to just continuing on with the grind?
Right. So I think the first smaller trigger was in 2019. My father passed away. I was extremely close to my father. He was a very important person in my life, and his passing, even though he didn't die young, he died at almost 101. So it made me a bit more circumspect. It made me think more about a lot of the things he would talk to me about just in our day-to-day discussions. And one of the things he would say to me, just in a more generic sense, is it's not about making a living, it's about making a life. And so I would think about those statements, and sometimes I would think about them again after he was gone, and I started to think about my perspective and where I was, and my decision to transition wasn't really so much an on-off switch. It started to happen a few years ago, and then what really kind of accelerated it was I had a number of my friends who passed away. These are all contemporaries of mine in their early to mid 60s, all of whom got sick and died. Some had long illnesses, some had short illnesses. And so I started to really think about that, like, holy cow, you know, I may not live to be 100 years old like my father. I may not be, immortal. And so as a result of that, I came to realize, it took some time, that the most valuable resource that I had is my time. And that I don't know how much of it I've got. And all the money in the world that I have is not going to buy me another minute. So I just said, okay, I've got to rethink, and I've got to think about what's important. And as a result of that, I said, you know what? There are other things I want to do with my life, and it's time to start to think about stepping away.
So when you started that process, began stepping away, what was the hardest part about that? What did you have the most difficulty giving up and letting go?
Uh, probably the feeling. A couple of things. Part of it may be the feeling of being needed. It's nice to be needed. Everyone wants to be needed. And also at least for me, the excitement that comes from being in a deal. Like, to me, part of it was just I enjoyed the excitement of of being in a deal. It's like being in the heat of battle, and I like that. And so I had to think about things in my life that would bring me satisfaction, and in some respects would not necessarily replicate that feeling, but give me a sense of meaning and accomplishment.
So you go from that mega, billion-dollar deal world where the pressure is extreme without question about it. You're in the international arena. You're dealing with extremely successful people, dealing with really complex issues. And then you shift over to traveling a bit, fishing, and tending a family farm in Maine. That's a pretty big step in a different direction. How did that, your skills as a lawyer and that whole experience bring you to that lifestyle?
Yeah. Well, there are some similarities that you might not think about. So, being a deal lawyer is, listen, any lawyer is just a problem solver. It's all lawyers do, is solve problems. And so the skill of problem solving and the ability to solve problems can give satisfaction, whether the problem that you're solving is how do we put these two companies together, or how do we solve for this or antitrust issue or whatever, versus solving a problem on a farm and having to learn new problems and how to solve them. So I didn't know anything about farming other than when I was a kid, I'd help my mother with the garden and I hated it because I was being told what to do. But as an adult, having to learn new things, having to fix, having to figure out how to fix machinery, was just a fun new set of problems for me. It didn't mean I necessarily knew how to do them well, but in today's world with the internet, you have lots of tools that can help you do that. So it's just having new skills to learn, new things to master, and the joy that you get from having to figure out something that you didn't know how to do before. And I'm a curious person by nature, so that's great. I mean, and on the sort of fishing front, while there's lots of different kinds of fishing, but a lot of the fishing that I do is very much stalking. It's very intense type of fishing, and a lot of it is you have to make decisions in very real time, and so you're not like sitting around with your feet up. It's so it's very much an adrenaline type environment. And what I realized was I needed to make sure that some of what I did in my life delivered adrenaline. And as ridiculous as it sounds to someone who's not familiar with fishing, there are certain types of fishing that give you gobs of adrenaline.
That would be sort of the way most people would not identify that with fishing.
Correct. They would think I'm out of my mind. I've lost my mind. But yes, yeah, and that's okay.
But so getting the adrenaline rush from fishing, but you're out there for a long period of time trying to stalk the fish, get the fish, you bring it back in, and then you let it go, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So how does, the stereotypical view of a farmer would be that someone who's, again, it's not a fast-paced life. It's kind of a slow-paced life. You're kind of contemplating the crops. You're looking at your cattle. You're doing whatever you're doing. How does that equate to you? How did you make that transition?
Yeah, that certainly is a different kind of a transition. I was a person who always liked being outside. And I just found enjoyment in being out in fresh air and in nice surroundings. And because the farm is basically where my wife grew up, and there's a lot of sentimentality there, it was fun for me to see how much I could learn from the way she lived her life and the things that she had to do on a day-to-day basis that were like completely different from me, growing up in the suburbs of New York City. And so there's no doubt that it was an adjustment, and it's a different adjustment than the adrenaline type of a thing, because you're right, it's not that. There's also sort of the satisfaction of being, I don't know whether you call it a caretaker or whatever, but actually getting to see things grow. And when I was young and my mother asked me for help in the garden, she was like obsessed with growing tomatoes and celery and lettuce and peppers and all these things. And we would have it for dinner or whatever. But it never really did a thing for me. But when I started to do it myself and we started to see the results that we could get and the joy that came from that, it was just a nice thing. It's a totally different thing than the fishing, but something that's nevertheless gives me some satisfaction.
So I have this vision in my mind of you out there in the field, hoeing down the whatever crops there are, and then dragging them over to the roadside stand and being the seller of beets and whatever. Is that your life up there?
No, we don't sell. We really don't sell anything. We basically give what we produce, and we don't produce. The hay crop is the big crop, and that goes to a farm up the road that uses it to feed their. They have a very large herd of dairy cows, so the hay that's the big volume production, and that goes there. All the other stuff is fruits and vegetables, and that's just stuff that we grow, we eat, We give to friends. When we visit people, we bring them a hunk of stuff. And it's just a way to share that you care about somebody and that you took the time and trouble to raise that thing and to nurture it and to give it to them.
You should follow in the steps of Paul Newman. He went on, he got his own spaghetti
He
sauce.
made salad dressing, right? He made salad dressing.
You have the DiFiore line,
Yeah. I'm not so sure I'd have as much success as him, but it might not be a bad thing.
So, during this process of transition, leaving big law and moving into your world you're in now, were there any disappointments along the way that you sort of didn't anticipate that, looking back, you might have done differently?
You mean in the law practice piece or in the transition piece?
In the transition piece.
I'm so new. Talk to me in 2 years, right? So right now, this is new, right? I finished in November, so I'm not even really 6 months out. I tried quite hard. To make the transition with the younger lawyers as good as it could be. I still talk to the younger lawyers 2-3 times a week and give them advice and help them along. I don't know transition-wise what else I could have done better. So I don't know. I think I'm still that's evolving, and I would also probably say, Doug, that the thing that's the hardest for me right now in this very early phase of, let's say, first inning or second inning of this chapter is a daily routine that's durable and that I can stick with. Because every time I'm doing something new, I upset the routine. I was bone fishing in the Bahamas about 10 days ago. So I had a certain routine before that. That routine went out the window when I went on the fishing trip. Now I'm back and doing some other things, and I'm trying to reestablish my routine, and my exercise routine has fallen off again. I've got to get back on that. And I stopped. I'm studying Italian, and I haven't done that for 10 days. And so I still need a little bit of help with focus and not trying to do too much. Stick to a few things.
Yeah, you're suffering from what I've seen in other lawyers is that lawyers always during their careers, they need to be organized. They need everything sort of to be relatively linear. They know what's going to happen because they have to do that to predict the issues that their clients are going to have and to see the beginning and end of a deal in a very logical progression.
Yeah.
When in transition, all of that organization kind of goes out the window, and I'd like to, you're basically hopping from one lily pad to another. Think of yourself as a frog hopping from one lily pad to another, and it's a different activity in each of those pads, and you just got to kind of go the process. That was my experience after I first left the firm and started transitioning. It was like, well, I need to have a routine. I need to do this. I need to be at the desk here. I need whatever, and then over time, it eventually fades away. And it's the expression I uses embracing irrelevancy, which is a tongue-in-cheek way.
No, I hear you, but I think that there's truth to what you're saying, and it's going to take me a bit more time to actually either to feel as if I am using my time as efficiently as I can, or if I'm not, to accept the fact that I'm not doing that and not worry about it.
So if you were giving advice to a young attorney, the young Gerry DiFiore who was coming up through the ranks and killing it all the way through, what advice would you give him or her today?
Well, I guess I would say, for the young lawyer who's developing, I would say recognize the fact that your goals are likely to change. Like when I was a younger lawyer, and it was early on, my goal was, okay, you have to be technically proficient, you have to be smart, you have to learn the law. Then after kind of got that down, I'm like, okay, now you have to learn how to develop relationships with people. Then you have to learn how to try and attract clients, and then you have to learn how to be fiscally responsible. You have to learn how to lead teams. What you find is that your goals keep changing, right? And I guess probably there was a long part of my career where I felt like my only goal was make the pie bigger, make the pie bigger, make the pie bigger, make the pie bigger. And then I got to the stage where I said, maybe that's not the only goal. Maybe the goal is, what else can you do that's valuable? How do you develop talent in others? So, the advice I probably would have given to myself was be more mindful of the fact that the goals are going to change and that that's okay. I think there was a time in my life when I didn't think that the goals weren't ever going to change. It was always keep pushing harder, farther, longer, bigger race, faster, this, that, the other thing. So that would be probably how I would approach it. I would also say that in the transition that I've made from getting out of the fast lane and doing the things on the farm and all of that, is I've come to truly value life and living in the moment and experiencing the moment. And there's an Italian expression. It's called la dolce far niente. Don't know if you've ever heard it. It means the sweetness of doing nothing. That's the expression. And it's about a way of approaching life and about being mindful of whatever it is that you're doing. It's not like laziness or anything like that, but it's just stopping and smelling the roses. And so if I'm up at the farm and it's the end of the day and we're sitting out on the knoll overlooking the river, and you can hear the birds singing, and you can feel the breeze, and you can smell the perfume and the wildflowers, and you just say to yourself, wow, I get the chance to experience this. It's peaceful, it's beautiful, and you just embrace it for what it is. And if I wasn't sitting there and I was running around on 10 phone calls, I would have missed all of that. And you know what? Life is short, right? And so you have to try and have as many satisfying experiences as you can.
You and I traveled throughout the world in our careers, all over the world. And people, I'm sure you had these occurrences where someone would say to you, wow, you were in France, you were in Paris, you were in Tokyo, you were in Beijing, you were all these other places. What's it like there? And early on, you're saying, well, I really didn't see it. I kind of went there, did the deal, and left. And as I got further on in my career and did this travel, like adopting sort of a philosophy you're talking about, I made sure I was there a couple extra days. And so I would see these places and enjoy them, because whether you're doing the deal, if the deal itself in Beijing or in Paris or in Peoria is the same deal, it's the same thing, just different people sitting in a room. And there's maybe you look out the window, but that's about it. So your advice there, I think, is spot on. And early on, you can miss those places, but as you get through your career, you got to start taking a look at what's around you and not get caught up in the craziness of being a lawyer.
Yeah,
So,
and I had much the same experience, with all the travel, especially earlier on, where I missed everything. But it was different when I lived in Hong Kong, because then I was there. And I could then stop and say, okay, I can go to work, I can do the deal, and then I can stop and I can just observe, and I can learn about a new culture. And again, it gives you the chance to say, wow, this is different than the US, but there may be a lot of differences, but human nature is fundamentally the same, whether it's here or on another continent. So yeah.
So take us a little forward now and give your advice to the lawyer who is now facing that point where they realize, for whatever reason, they've got to put the law behind them and they've got to move on to something else. What's your advice to them?
I would say, learn to find joy in the journey. Again, when your head is down and you're pushing and you're just thinking about that immediate goal or whatever that goal is, more deals, bigger practice, this, that, and then you have to rethink. You have to rethink when you're now at that later stage in your career. how do you find joy in not thinking that way, but thinking a different way? And the joy that comes from being in the journey of making that transition and looking at the world in kind of a different way. And you have to be able to sort of change your mindset to be able to appreciate that, because if you don't do that and you try and judge your transition future by your old set of metrics, you're going to be upset. It's going to be disjointed. You're not going to feel, you may feel unfulfilled because you feel like, wow, I'm getting off the horse. Whereas if you say, when you get off the horse, you get to stop and look around and see everything that you couldn't see because you were too busy trying to be on the horse, getting to where you needed to go, and you missed it. So that would be kind of how I would approach it. And I think that when you come to the realization of the preciousness of time in general, that will give you a change in your perspective that will be valuable to make the journey.
I couldn't think of a better moment than to end the podcast on that advice. That was terrific. And the whole podcast was great, Gerry. Couldn't thank you enough for being on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.